Most people spend their entire lives trying to earn more, save more, and invest more, and still end up wondering why their financial situation never really changes in a meaningful way. They chase higher salaries, side hustles, and smarter-sounding strategies. But almost nobody stops to ask the deeper question: what is actually driving those decisions in the first place? Because here's the thing, it's not your income that determines where you end up financially. It's something far more invisible, far more consistent, and far more powerful than any paycheck you'll ever receive. And if you don't learn to recognize it and manage it deliberately, it will quietly shape every financial choice you make for the rest of your life, without you ever realizing it. We're talking about your relationship with time. Not time management in the productivity hack sense. Not waking up at 5 in the morning or blocking your calendar into color-coded segments. We're talking about something deeper. The way you personally perceive time, how far into the future you naturally think, and how much weight you give to consequences that won't arrive until years from now. This single internal framework, your time orientation, is the invisible force behind almost every financial outcome you've ever experienced. And the vast majority of people have never been taught to examine it, let alone adjust it. Think about how most financial decisions actually get made in real life. Someone gets a bonus at work and immediately feels the pull to spend it on something visible, something that delivers a feeling right now. Someone else sees a great investment opportunity but hesitates, waits, second guesses, and by the time they feel ready, the window has passed. A person starts a budget in January with genuine enthusiasm, and by March, they've drifted back into their old patterns because the rewards of sticking to that budget feel abstract and distant compared to the immediate comfort of letting things slide. None of these are failures of intelligence. They're failures of time orientation. Here's a simple way to understand this concept. Imagine two people standing at a crossroads. One of them consistently makes decisions based on what feels best right now, in this moment, today. The other makes decisions based on what will produce the best outcome in 5, 10, or 20 years. Neither person is more intelligent than the other. Neither one earns dramatically more. But over a long enough period of time, the gap between their financial lives will become enormous. Not because of luck or opportunity, but because one of them is playing a longer game than the other. Researchers in behavioral economics have studied this pattern extensively, and what they've found is striking. The single most reliable predictor of long-term financial well-being is not IQ, not education level, not even starting wealth. It is the ability to delay gratification, to trade a smaller reward now for a larger, more meaningful outcome later. This capacity is directly connected to how a person experiences time internally. People who feel deeply connected to their future selves tend to make very different choices than people who feel like their future self is essentially a stranger. And that's actually a useful way to think about it. If your future self feels like someone you barely know, why would you sacrifice anything for them today? Why skip the expensive dinner for someone you don't particularly feel connected to? Why build an emergency fund for a version of yourself that feels theoretical and remote? When the future feels distant and abstract, the present feels overwhelming and real, and present desires almost always win that contest. But when you start to see your future self not as a stranger, but as a continuation of who you are right now, when you develop a genuine emotional connection to the person you're becoming, your decision-making shifts dramatically. Suddenly, spending patterns that previously felt harmless start to look like what they actually are, small redirections of resources away from someone you genuinely care about, which is your future self. This is not just philosophical. It translates into concrete, everyday choices. Consider someone who carries a credit card balance month to month. In the short-term framing, that purchase they made 3 months ago is already done, already enjoyed, and the monthly payment feels manageable. But in a longer-term framing, that same purchase is still costing them money right now, and will continue to do so until the balance is cleared. And during that entire period, the money going toward interest is money that cannot be redirected toward anything that builds value. The action was the same. The interpretation of what that action means over time is completely different. And it's the interpretation that drives the behavior. Now let's get into why this matters so much in the context of wealth building specifically, because this is where the compounding effect of time orientation becomes most visible. Wealth, at its core, is not about a single smart decision. It is about thousands of small, consistent decisions made in alignment with a long-term direction. It is the cumulative result of a pattern of behavior sustained over years and decades. And sustaining a pattern of behavior over that kind of time frame requires something that most short-term thinkers simply never develop: a strong, clear, emotionally real vision of where they are going. People who build lasting financial security are almost universally people who think in terms of decades, not months. They evaluate opportunities differently. When they see a potential investment, they're not just asking, "What does this do for me in the next quarter?" They're asking, "Where does this lead in 10 years if I stay consistent?" When they make spending decisions, they're not just calculating whether they can afford something today. They're running a quiet background calculation of what that money could become if it were directed differently over a longer period. This is not a complicated process. It's a habit of mental framing that becomes automatic over time. And here's one of the most important insights in this entire conversation. The good news is that your time orientation is not fixed. It is not a personality trait you were born with and are stuck with forever. It is a lens, and lenses can be adjusted. The way you relate to time and future consequences can be deliberately trained and reshaped through consistent practice. One of the most effective ways to begin shifting your time orientation is to get radically specific about your future. Vague goals produce vague motivation. "I want to be financially comfortable someday" is not a compelling enough vision to override today's very specific and immediate desires. But a clear, detailed, emotionally resonant picture of what your life looks like in 15 years. The freedom you have, the stress you don't have, the choices available to you. That kind of vision creates a genuine internal pull toward future-oriented decisions. It makes the future feel real. And when the future feels real, you naturally start treating your future self with more care and consideration. Another powerful practice is learning to insert a deliberate pause between impulse and action. Most short-term financial decisions happen on autopilot. The urge arrives, the action follows almost immediately, and only afterward does any reflection occur. By building in even a brief delay, a 24-hour window before any non-essential purchase above a certain amount, you create space for your longer-term thinking to catch up with your immediate instincts. That pause is not about deprivation. It's about giving yourself the chance to make a conscious choice rather than a reactive one. There's also something to be said about the environment you surround yourself with. Time orientation is not purely an internal phenomenon. It is heavily influenced by the social and cultural environment around you. If you are consistently surrounded by people who prioritize immediate consumption and visible status over long-term accumulation and quiet financial strength, those norms will shape your own defaults over time. This is not about judging anyone's choices. It's simply about recognizing that your reference points for what feels normal financially will powerfully influence your own behavior, often in ways you never consciously examine. When you start paying attention to the time orientation of the people and content you engage with regularly, you can begin making more intentional choices about those influences. Surrounding yourself with people who discuss long-term thinking, who share their experiences with patience and delayed reward, and who normalize future-focused decision-making, that kind of environment gradually recalibrates your own internal baseline for what feels like a reasonable approach to money. Let's also address something that often gets overlooked in conversations about financial behavior: the emotional component. Many short-term financial decisions are not really about the money itself. They are emotional responses in disguise. Retail therapy is real. Stress eating that happens to be expensive is real. The deep psychological pull toward things that signal success to others right now, rather than things that quietly build security over time, is real. When you understand that impulse spending often serves an emotional function, you can begin addressing that need in ways that don't compromise your long-term financial direction. The goal is not to eliminate enjoyment or deny yourself any immediate pleasure. The goal is to develop enough self-awareness that you can distinguish between choices that genuinely serve you and choices that are just emotional noise dressed up as decisions. One of the most counterintuitive aspects of developing strong time orientation is that it doesn't actually require sacrifice in the painful, white-knuckle sense. As your vision of the future becomes clearer and more emotionally compelling, many of the choices that used to feel like sacrifices simply stop feeling that way. When you are genuinely excited about where you are going financially, the short-term distractions lose their grip, not because you force yourself to resist them, but because they no longer feel as significant compared to what you're building. This is the difference between discipline that comes from willpower, which is exhausting and unsustainable, and discipline that comes from clarity of purpose, which is energizing and self-reinforcing. Willpower alone is a finite resource that depletes under pressure, but a vivid, emotionally connected vision of your future is a renewable source of direction that gets stronger, not weaker, the more consistently you act in alignment with it. So what does all of this look like in practical terms? It looks like someone who doesn't just react to a financial windfall but has a predetermined framework for how unexpected money gets allocated. It looks like someone who reviews their spending not to feel guilty, but to ensure their money is moving in the direction that matches what they actually want their life to look like. It looks like someone who sees patience not as passive waiting but as an active, strategic position, understanding that time is the ingredient that transforms ordinary consistent behavior into extraordinary long-term results. It looks like someone who has made peace with the fact that the most powerful financial moves often don't feel impressive in the moment. They only look impressive in hindsight, after the compounding has had years to do its work. Here is what it ultimately comes down to. Every financial outcome in your life, the ones you're proud of, and the ones you'd rather change, traces back to a decision. And every decision you've ever made was filtered through your relationship with time. The people who build lasting financial security are not doing anything mystical. They are simply playing on a longer timeline than most people are willing to sustain. They have trained themselves to give more weight to outcomes that are years away than to impulses that are seconds away. And they do this not through perfect discipline, but through a clear, deeply personal vision of what they are building and why it matters. You already have the raw material for this. The capacity for long-term thinking is not reserved for a special category of person. It is a skill, it is a practice, and it is available to anyone willing to start applying it deliberately. The question is simply whether you will take ownership of it, or leave it on autopilot and let the short-term impulses make your decisions for you. Your future self is watching the choices you make today. Those choices are either building something meaningful, or quietly eroding it. The good news is that you get to decide which one it will be, and that decision is available to you right now. If this perspective gave you something worth thinking about, take a moment to like this video. It genuinely helps more people find content like this. Drop a comment below sharing one area where you want to start applying longer-term thinking in your own financial life. And if you want to keep building this kind of mindset, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. The conversation is just getting started.